Apache custom, the cowboy who won the women's honor. He was born in a place where the land seemed endless and the sky felt close enough to touch. Wide plains stretched in every direction, broken only by low hills, dusty trails, and the quiet movement of horses. People didn't talk much about dreams there. Life was about work, respect, and survival. From the time he could walk, he followed older men to the corrals and fields, watching how they treated animals, land, and each other. But more importantly, he watched how they treated women. He did not grow up fully Apache, nor fully a cowboy in the traditional sense. His father worked cattle for ranchers who came and went, and his mother came from a community that lived by old Apache customs. Because of this, he learned early that rules were not just written in books or spoken by authorities. Some rules were older, passed quietly from one generation to the next, carried in behavior rather than words. As a boy, he listened more than he spoke. When elders gathered in the evenings, sharing stories under fading sunlight, he stayed close, but silent. He noticed how women were spoken to with care, how their opinions were never brushed aside, and how their safety was treated as everyone's responsibility. If a woman entered a room, conversation softened. If one was upset, people paid attention. It was not forced or dramatic. It was simply the way things were done. His mother was the first to teach him what honor truly meant. She told him that strength was not about raising your voice or proving yourself to others. Strength, she said, was about knowing when to stand still and when to step forward. She often reminded him that how a man treats women shows his true character. Anyone can act brave when others are watching, she once told him. But real courage shows when no one is praising you. As he grew older, his days filled with long hours of work. He learned to ride well, not through training schools or formal lessons, but by falling, getting back up, and trying again. Horses responded to him naturally. He didn't force them. He listened to them. Ranchers noticed this and trusted him with difficult animals. Word spread quietly that he was dependable, calm, and fair. Despite this, he never sought attention. When others bragged about their achievements, he stayed quiet. He believed that actions spoke louder than stories. At community gatherings, he stood at the edges, observing. He noticed small things others missed, changes in mood, nervous glances, moments when laughter felt forced. His upbringing had trained him to see beyond the surface. Living between cultures was not always easy. Some cowboys saw Apache customs as outdated, while some Apache elders viewed the cattle world with caution. He belonged fully to neither side, yet was welcomed by both because he showed respect. He followed rules even when no one enforced them. That consistency earned trust over time. One custom stayed with him more than any other, the idea that honor was shared. If one person was disrespected, the whole community felt it. Silence, in certain moments, could be a form of agreement. This idea settled deeply in his mind, shaping how he saw the world. He understood that ignoring wrong behavior did not make it disappear. It allowed it to grow. As a young man, he watched others choose the easier path, looking away, staying neutral, avoiding trouble. He did not judge them harshly. He understood fear. He understood the cost of standing alone. But he also understood the heavier cost of regret. That was something he had learned by watching elders who carried quiet sadness in their eyes, men who once stayed silent and never forgave themselves. The land itself seemed to reinforce these lessons. The plains offered no hiding places. Storms came without warning. If you made a mistake, you faced it. If you respected the land, it sustained you. If you ignored its rules, it punished you, not with cruelty, but with indifference. This shaped his sense of responsibility. He believed life worked the same way. When he reached adulthood, people began to rely on him, not because he demanded respect, but because he earned it slowly. Women trusted him instinctively. They spoke freely around him, knowing he listened without judgment. He never took advantage of that trust, never twisted words, never crossed lines. This earned him a quiet reputation that mattered more than any title. At gatherings, women often asked him for help, not because he was the strongest, but because he was reliable. He would walk someone home without making it a show. He would step in during tense moments with calm words instead of raised voices. He knew that protection didn't always mean confrontation. Sometimes it meant presence. He also understood that respect was not something you demanded from women. It was something you gave first. He never spoke over them. He never dismissed concerns as small or emotional. He remembered names, faces, and stories. That attention made people feel seen, and being seen often brings a sense of safety. The elders noticed this too. Though they rarely praised openly, they began to include him in conversations meant for older men. They tested him subtly, sharing stories with lessons hidden inside. He listened carefully, answering only when asked. Each time his responses showed that he understood the deeper meaning. That understanding mattered more than age. One elder once told him that customs survive not because they are written down, but because someone chooses to live by them when it's inconvenient. That sentence stayed with him. He realized then that honor was not automatic. It required choice, often at a personal cost. As time passed, changes came to the region. Outsiders arrived with money, influence, and different values. Some treated the land as something to take from, not care for. Some treated people as tools or obstacles. The balance he had known began to shift. Respect was no longer assumed. It had to be defended. He noticed discomfort among the women during public events. Laughter sounded forced. Conversations ended abruptly when certain people approached. These were small signs, easy to ignore. Many did, but he didn't. His upbringing had trained him to recognize discomfort even when no one spoke about it openly. He felt something unsettled growing inside him, not anger, but awareness. He understood that moments were coming where choices would matter more than intentions. He did not seek conflict. He hoped it would never be necessary. But he also knew hope alone was not enough. At night, under quiet skies, he thought about the stories he had heard as a child. Stories where people were remembered not for what they owned, but for what they stood for. He wondered what kind of story his life would become. Not one told loudly, but one whispered with respect. He made a promise to himself then, simple and firm. If the time came when someone's dignity was threatened, he would not look away. He would act according to the code he was raised with, no matter how uncomfortable it became. Not for praise, not for recognition, but because that was the only way he knew how to live with himself. At that moment he did not know how serious the test would be. He did not know whose honor would be at stake, or how alone he might feel. All he knew was that the land, the elders, and the women who trusted him had shaped him for a reason. The change did not arrive suddenly. It came quietly, like dust settling after distant movement. New faces appeared at gatherings, people with polished boots, confident voices, and money that spoke louder than manners. They laughed easily, took up space, and acted as if the land and the people on it were simply part of the scenery. Most locals tried to adjust. Some stayed polite. Others stayed silent. Silence, after all, was safer. The cowboy noticed how the mood shifted when these outsiders were around. Conversations shortened. Women stood closer to one another. Smiles appeared quickly and disappeared just as fast. Nothing openly wrong happened at first, and that made it easier for many to ignore the signs. There was no clear reason to cause trouble, no moment that forced action. Yet discomfort hung in the air, thick and familiar to him. One afternoon during a community gathering meant to celebrate the season, the tension became impossible to ignore. Families had gathered under open skies. Food was shared, music played softly, and children ran freely. It should have been a day of ease. Instead, a quiet unease moved through the crowd. The cowboy stood near the edge, as he often did, watching. He noticed a young Apache woman standing with relatives, her posture stiff, her eyes lowered. Nearby stood a man who did not belong to the community. His voice was loud, his confidence careless. He spoke as if attention was owed to him. His words carried a tone that made people uncomfortable, though no single sentence crossed an obvious line. Then came the moment that changed everything. In front of others in plain view, the outsider acted in a way that stripped the young woman of her dignity. It was not dramatic, not loud enough to stop the gathering, but clear enough to leave no doubt. Her face flushed with shock. Her body went still. For a heartbeat, the entire space seemed to freeze. No one moved. Some looked away. Some pretended not to notice. Others watched, uncertain, calculating the cost of speaking up. The music continued, but it sounded wrong now, like noise covering something broken. The woman stepped back, surrounded by family, but the damage had already been done. It wasn't just her who had been wronged. It was the unspoken code that had protected generations. The cowboy felt something tighten in his chest. Not rage, not panic, clarity. He remembered his mother's words. He remembered the elder stories. He remembered that silence could become agreement if left unchallenged. He looked around and saw fear in familiar faces. Not weakness, but fear born from experience. The outsider was connected to people with power. Speaking up could cost jobs, land access, safety. Everyone knew this. That knowledge pressed down on the crowd, keeping mouths closed. The woman's relatives guided her away gently, shielding her without drawing attention. She did not cry. That made it worse. Her quiet was heavy, full of held-back emotion. The cowboy watched her disappear into the crowd, knowing that what had happened would follow her long after the gathering ended. The outsider laughed it off, unaware or unconcerned with the weight of his actions. He moved on, satisfied, untouched by consequences. For him, it was nothing. For the community, it was a wound. As the event continued, people tried to return to normal. Plates were passed. Conversations resumed. But something had shifted. The cowboy could feel it. He caught whispered exchanges, tense glances, the kind of communication that happens when people are unsure who they can trust. Later, as the sun lowered and the crowd thinned, women gathered together in small groups. Their voices were low, their expressions serious. They did not need to explain. Their shared understanding was clear. What happened could not be ignored, yet no one wanted to be the first to speak. The cowboy stood apart, giving space, but listening. He heard concern, anger held carefully, fear of what might happen next. One woman said quietly that this was not the first time. Another said it would not be the last if nothing changed. Each word added weight to the silence that had already done enough harm. Men gathered too, though their conversations were different. Some admitted it felt wrong. Others argued it wasn't worth the trouble. A few claimed it was not their place to get involved. The cowboy listened without interrupting. He understood their fear, but he also understood the cost of doing nothing. That night, sleep did not come easily. The image of the woman's frozen expression replayed in his mind. He thought of how quickly a safe space had turned unsafe. He thought of how easily dignity could be taken when no one stood in the way. He walked outside under the stars, the land quiet and steady. The same land that had taught him responsibility now seemed to wait for his choice. He knew that if he spoke up, he would stand alone at first. He knew there would be consequences, spoken and unspoken. But he also knew that staying silent would change him in ways he could not accept. By morning, the story had spread, not loudly, not officially, but through looks and careful words. Everyone knew what had happened. No one named it openly. Naming it would mean responsibility. It would mean action. The woman stayed away from public spaces for a time. When she did appear, she stayed close to others, quieter than before. Her laughter was gone. People treated her kindly, but kindness without justice felt thin. The cowboy noticed how she avoided certain areas, certain faces. Her world had shrunk, and that felt deeply wrong. The outsider remained confident. He continued to show up, acting as if nothing had changed. In a way, he was right. Nothing had changed. Yet, the lack of response only reinforced his sense of untouchability. The cowboy felt the weight of expectation settle on him, though no one said a word. Women met his eyes more often now. Not pleading, not demanding, just watching. They had seen how he lived, how he listened.
They were waiting to see if those values would hold when tested.
Elders watched too, They said nothing, but their silence was different. It was the silence of judgment, not fear. They wanted to see whether the teachings they passed down still mattered in a changing world. Days passed, and with each one the discomfort grew. The incident became a quiet divide, separating those who accepted it from those who could not. The cowboy felt that line drawing itself clearly in his own heart. He understood now that this was not just about one moment or one person. It was about whether the community's values still meant something when challenged by power. It was about whether respect was optional or essential. He did not rush into action. Apache custom taught patience before confrontation, he observed. He listened. He gathered understanding not to build anger but to build truth. He wanted no confusion, no exaggeration, only clarity. By the time he was ready, he knew exactly what he had seen and why it mattered. He knew that speaking up would force others to choose sides. He knew it would bring discomfort, but he also knew that dignity, once lost, was far harder to restore than any reputation. The violation had been small in action, but large in meaning. It had exposed the cracks forming beneath the surface, and now those cracks demanded attention. The cowboy took a deep breath and accepted what lay ahead. The quiet days were over. The moment he had prepared for, without knowing it, had arrived. The first step he took was not loud or public. He understood that rushing forward with strong words could make people defensive. Apache custom valued calm before action, and he respected that. So he began by speaking quietly to those who had been there that day. He did not accuse, he did not push. He simply asked what they had seen and how it made them feel. Some avoided the conversation. Others spoke in half sentences, careful and nervous. But a few, once they realized he was truly listening, began to open up. They admitted that what happened had felt wrong. They admitted they had wanted to say something but were afraid. He did not shame them for that. He told them fear was understandable, but silence carried its own cost. Word spread that he was asking questions. The outsider noticed. His posture changed slightly when the cowboy was nearby. There was a hint of irritation now, a sense that control was slipping. Still he acted confident, laughing loudly, brushing off tension as if it were nothing. That confidence was built on the belief that no one would challenge him directly. The cowboy knew that if he confronted the man publicly without preparation, it would turn into chaos. That would help no one. He wanted the truth to stand on its own, without anger clouding it. So he continued quietly, gathering clarity, making sure the story was understood the same way by all who had witnessed it. When he finally spoke to the elders, he did so with respect. He did not demand action. He explained what he had seen, what others had confirmed, and why it mattered. He reminded them of the old teachings, how dignity was not personal property, but a shared responsibility. The elders listened carefully. Their faces showed concern, not surprise. They had seen these situations before, though never this clearly. One elder asked him if he was prepared to stand alone if needed. The question was not meant to discourage him, only to test his resolve. He answered honestly. He said he hoped others would stand with him, but even if they did not, he could not stay silent. The elder nodded slowly. That was answer enough. The next gathering was smaller, more focused. The cowboy knew the outsider would attend. He had chosen this moment carefully. The space was open, public enough to prevent denial, but calm enough to allow words to be heard. People sensed something was coming. Conversations were quieter than usual. When the moment arrived, the cowboy did not raise his voice. He did not accuse with anger. He spoke clearly and respectfully, describing exactly what he had witnessed. He did not use dramatic language. He did not exaggerate. He spoke as someone stating a simple truth. The outsider reacted with disbelief first, then irritation. He tried to laugh it off, to make it seem like a misunderstanding. He questioned the cowboy's intentions, hinting that he was causing trouble for attention. The cowboy remained calm. He reminded the man that this was not about him, but about restoring dignity where it had been taken. Others began to speak then, slowly, At first, one person confirmed what they had seen, then another. Each voice added weight. The outsider's confidence weakened as the story no longer belonged to one person. It belonged to the community. The woman herself did not speak. She did not have to. The truth did not require her to relive the moment. The cowboy made sure of that. He had learned long ago that protecting someone also meant protecting them from further harm. The tension in the space was heavy but controlled. No one shouted. No one made threats. The strength of the moment came from restraint. The outsider realized he could not argue with calm truth spoken by many. His words became shorter. His tone changed. The cowboy did not ask for punishment. He asked for acknowledgement. He asked for respect. He asked for assurance that such behavior would not be tolerated. These requests were simple, reasonable, and impossible to dismiss without revealing deeper wrongdoing. The elders spoke next. Their voices carried authority earned through years of service and fairness. They reminded everyone present that customs were not optional decorations. They were the foundation of trust. When that trust was broken, it had to be repaired, or the community would fracture. The outsider was told clearly that his actions were not acceptable. He was given a choice: to accept responsibility and change his behavior, or to remove himself from spaces where he had caused harm. It was not a threat. It was a boundary. For the first time, the man looked uncertain. Power, he realized, did not always come from money or connections. Sometimes it came from shared values and quiet unity. He agreed to leave the gathering and not return. His departure was not dramatic. He simply walked away, stripped of the confidence he once carried. The moment passed without celebration. There were no cheers, no victory speeches. The cowboy felt no satisfaction, only relief that the truth had been spoken. The space felt lighter, though the work was not finished. Afterward, people approached him quietly. Some thanked him. Others apologized for staying silent. He accepted both with humility. He reminded them that this was not about him. It was about choosing respect over comfort.
The woman returned to public spaces slowly. She was never pushed to speak or explain.
Instead, she was met with support, patience, and restored trust. Her presence, once withdrawn, began to return. Small signs mattered: a relaxed posture, a smile that reached her eyes again. The cowboy returned to his routine. He did not change his behavior or seek recognition, but something had shifted. People understood now that silence was not the only option, that knowledge alone changed the balance. He knew challenges would come again. One action did not solve everything. But he also knew that customs survived through moments like this, when someone chose to act calmly and firmly, even when it was uncomfortable. At night under the same wide sky, he felt at peace. Not because the path had been easy, but because it had been right. The code he lived by had been tested, and it had held. After the outsider left, the land did not suddenly feel perfect again. Problems do not disappear just because one moment is handled well, but something important had changed. People stood differently. Conversations were more open. There was less fear in the air, even if some tension still remained. The silence that once protected the wrong thing had been broken, and that mattered more than anyone wanted to admit out loud. The days that followed were quiet. No one rushed to talk about what had happened, but no one pretended it hadn't happened either. That kind of honesty was new. Before, uncomfortable moments were buried. Now they were remembered, not with gossip, but with understanding. People had learned that ignoring harm did not protect peace. It only delayed healing. The cowboy returned to his daily work. He fixed fences, rode long distances, and cared for animals as he always had. On the surface, nothing about him changed. But inside the community, his presence felt different. He was no longer just the quiet man who did his job well. He had become a point of reference. When people spoke about respect, his actions came to mind. Some men avoided him at first, not out of anger, but discomfort. They were forced to think about their own choices, their own silences. That kind of reflection is not easy. The cowboy did not confront them. He did not expect apologies. He believed that understanding takes time, and pressure often creates resistance. Women, however, seemed more at ease. They spoke more freely in public spaces. They lingered longer at gatherings. Their laughter sounded genuine again. These were small signs, but they were powerful. Safety does not always announce itself. Sometimes it shows up quietly, in the way people breathe easier. The young woman at the center of it all slowly reclaimed her place in the community. No one treated her as fragile or broken. She was respected, not pitied. That balance mattered. The cowboy understood that dignity is restored not through attention, but through normalcy. Through allowing someone to move forward without being defined by a single moment. Elders met privately to discuss what had happened. They spoke about how easily values can weaken when challenged by power or fear. They agreed that the response had been right, not because it was dramatic, but because it was fair. Justice, they reminded each other, does not always need force. Sometimes it needs truth, spoken clearly and supported by unity. Word traveled beyond the immediate community. Other groups heard that disrespect had been addressed without chaos or violence. Some were surprised. Others were inspired. A few were skeptical. Change always invites doubt. But the story did not grow through exaggeration. It stayed grounded in facts, which made it harder to dismiss. The outsider did not return. His absence spoke louder than his earlier confidence. People realized that influence without respect is fragile. Once challenged by truth, it often collapses. This understanding reshaped how the community viewed power. Wealth and connections mattered less than integrity. The cowboy was careful not to let the moment define him. He did not retell the story. He did not correct people when they spoke highly of him. Praise made him uncomfortable, not because he rejected appreciation, but because he believed the focus should remain on the values, not the individual. Still, responsibility followed him now. People came to him for advice, especially during moments of uncertainty. He listened, as he always had. He reminded them that courage looks different in different situations. Sometimes it means speaking up. Sometimes it means standing beside someone so they are not alone. He also understood that not every situation would end as cleanly. Some conflicts would be messy. Some would test patience and resolve. But the foundation had been strengthened. The community had proof that acting with calm strength could bring results. One evening, an elder approached him privately. The man thanked him, not with praise, but with acknowledgement. He said the cowboy had helped remind everyone why the old customs existed in the first place, not to control people, but to protect balance. The cowboy accepted the words quietly, knowing they carried weight. The land itself seemed unchanged, yet somehow steadier. Storms still came. Work remained hard. Life continued with its usual demands, but beneath it all was a renewed sense of accountability. People watched themselves more closely, not out of fear, but awareness. The cowboy reflected often during solitary rides. He thought about how close the moment had come to passing unnoticed, how easily he could have chosen comfort over responsibility. That thought stayed with him not as regret, but as reminder. Doing the right thing rarely announces itself ahead of time. It usually appears disguised as inconvenience. He also thought about the future, about younger generations watching, learning not from words, but from actions. He hoped they would remember that respect is not a reaction, it is a practice. Something lived daily, especially when it cost something. The community did not become perfect. Mistakes still happened. People still struggled. But there was now a shared understanding that dignity mattered, and that protecting it was everyone's role. That understanding created a quiet strength that could not be easily shaken. In the end, there was no final ceremony, no marker placed in the ground. Life moved forward, carrying the lesson with it. The cowboy blended back into the rhythm of daily life, content knowing that when the moment came, he had not turned away. Years passed, and time softened the sharp edges of memory, but it did not erase what had been learned. The incident became part of the community's quiet history, not told as a dramatic tale, but as a lesson woven into everyday life. People rarely mentioned names. They spoke instead about choices, about moments when doing nothing could shape the future just as much as action. The cowboy grew older, though he carried his years lightly. His hair showed hints of gray, and his movements were slower, but his presence remained steady. He was still a man who arrived early, worked without complaint, and listened more than he spoke. To outsiders, he seemed ordinary. To those who knew him, he represented something deeper. Young people began to seek him out, not because he advertised wisdom, but because he embodied it. They asked him about work, about respect, about how to know when to speak up. He never gave long speeches. He answered with stories, small and honest, always reminding them that courage does not look the same for everyone. What mattered was intention and care. Women in the community remembered him differently. They spoke of him with gratitude, not for saving anyone, but for standing firm when it counted. He had not taken their voices. He had protected the space where those voices could exist. That distinction mattered. It allowed healing without creating dependence. The young woman whose dignity had been challenged built a full life. She became confident again, active in gatherings, strong in her presence. She was never defined by what happened to her. Instead, she was known for her resilience and grace. The community followed her lead, treating her not as a symbol, but as a person. The elders aged as well, some passing on, others stepping back. Before they did, they shared the story carefully with the next generation. Not as praise for one man, but as proof that customs survive through action. They emphasized that respect is not inherited automatically. It must be practiced, especially when tested. The cowboy never claimed ownership of the lesson. When people credited him, he redirected attention to the values themselves. He believed that once a story becomes about a person, it risks becoming unreachable. But when it stays about choices, it remains useful. From time to time, outsiders passed through, as they always had. Some carried themselves well. Others tested boundaries. The difference now was that boundaries were clearer. Disrespect was addressed early, calmly, and firmly. No one waited for harm to grow before responding. The community did not become loud or confrontational. Instead, it became confident. Confidence does not need constant proof. It simply exists, steady and visible. That confidence made the land feel safer, not just for women but for everyone. The cowboy eventually stepped back from heavy work. Younger hands took over, eager and capable. He supported them without control, offering guidance only when asked. He knew that holding on too tightly could weaken what he wanted to protect. On quiet evenings, he sat under the open sky, listening to familiar sounds. He thought about the code he had been raised with and how easily it could have been lost. He understood now that traditions do not fade suddenly. They disappear slowly, through neglect, and they survive through small, brave decisions. When people spoke of him in later years, they did not exaggerate. They said he was fair, that he listened, that he acted when it mattered. That was enough. Legends are often built on noise. Respect is built on consistency. The phrase, "the cowboy who won the women's honor," was never one he used himself. It appeared quietly in conversation, a way of summarizing what had happened without reopening wounds. The honor, in truth, had always belonged to the women. He had simply helped protect it. As his story passed from one person to another, it changed slightly, as all stories do. But its heart remained intact. It reminded people that courage does not require anger, that justice does not always need force, and that one calm voice can break a heavy silence. Near the end of his life, when asked if he would do anything differently, he answered simply. He said he would still choose the same path, even knowing the cost, because living with regret is heavier than standing alone for a moment. When he was gone, there was no monument built, no official recognition. Instead, his legacy lived in behavior, in the way people spoke up sooner, in the way women moved freely, in the way respect became non-negotiable. The land continued, unchanged and eternal. The sky remained wide. Work went on. But beneath it all was a quiet understanding, passed from one generation to the next.